literally, decided that he wanted the crown of England. So he came over with his army of Vikings in about 200 to 300 longships. It was a huge number of men that he brought to bear on Saxon England. When he first attacked, King Harold wasn't able to muster an army to fend him off, so he left the job to his northern earls, Edgar and Morcar. The two earls formed an army, and the two great forces, Vikings and Saxons, met at a place called Fulford. The Battle of Fulford lasted for hours, and we're going to show you exactly how it happened. The two lines formed up. The Vikings, the Saxons, they formed up in shield walls, and they charged each other. You can see here the shield wall formation, a very important formation in the history of warfare. Ow, that looks like it hurts. The shield wall formation, very important, because it meant that you could stand in a line of men and prevent anyone from coming through. The overlapping shields generated a wall, hence the name. The two lines battled at each other for hours, which is what happens when you get two shield walls running into each other. They hit each other and hit each other, but no one could make any advantage. After a time, tired, weary, need to take on water and rest, the two teams disengaged, pulling back, reforming, ensuring that they were ready. The Saxons, of course, the defending army, only needed to hold the Vikings for as long as it took for Harold to muster a southern army and come up from the south. The problem was, the Vikings had some very, very special secret weapons. You see, it wasn't just shield men that came forward with the Vikings. As the Viking army came forward for a second engagement, that happened. You can see here a berserker. Now this is a proper Viking warrior, wielding just an axe with absolutely no care for his own health or his own well-being. He would charge headlong at the enemy ranks, often bare-shirted or wearing a bear's skin, hence the name berserker. He would charge headlong at the enemy ranks and just hit them and hit them. The only problem, of course, with being a berserker is that it often meant you ended up dead, since you were the first in the line. However, the berserkers did their job. They broke the Saxon line into pieces, and the Vikings were much better single fighters. They were much stronger once the Saxons were out of formation. And slowly but surely, Saxons just started dropping. Men were killed and killed over and over and over. It was savage, a dark and terrible day for Saxon England. The Saxons lost nearly 3,000 men, the Vikings barely 200. It was awful. Ladies and gentlemen, in time-honoured tradition of the Far Isles medieval society, the dead shall now rise. My fighters will take a short break to take on water because it's really, really hot today. They'll take a short break, and in the meantime I'll tell you what the Battle of Fulford meant for the Saxons of England. You see, with the northern earls defeated, their armies crushed and broken, there was no one left above York to prevent the Vikings from doing as they pleased. We all know what pleased Vikings. They ran about burning things, stealing things, and just generally being awful, awful people. They took York and they held York for a very long time. Northern England spent the middle part of 1066 suffering. However, before long, King Harold Godwinson managed to assemble his army of southern Saxons and chose to march up to meet the Viking threat. He wasn't prepared to just stand there and defend himself. He was going to kick these usurpers, vile cowards, out of his kingdom. So he marched upon them, and he met the Viking army at a place called Stamford Bridge. You might know of it. It's not the football ground. It's a big bridge just outside of York. Now, while at Stamford Bridge, the Viking army had camped, thinking themselves safe from attack. So when the Saxons came out of nowhere, fully formed and fully armoured, the Vikings had nothing they could do. They tried hard to protect themselves, charging the Saxon line in an attempt to prevent the Viking army, to prevent the Saxon army from breaking through. A small force of them held them on the wrong side of the bridge, while the rest of the Vikings pulled back, attempting to defend themselves and form up. But the Saxons, slowly but surely, were capable of pushing through and breaking the main army. Now, there's a tale about Stamford Bridge that on the day, having seen the advance force crushed, one lone Viking, took up an axe and stood on the bridge in an effort to defend his entire army. The story goes that he held the entire Saxon army there for 5 to 6 hours. They just kept sending man after man after man at the bridge, sometimes 3 or 4 men at a time, and always he'd just break them apart. He was a strong and powerful fighter. There are those who say he was a berserk. He attacked them hard, he attacked them repeatedly. Eventually the Saxons sent forward their own champion. You can see here wielding most of a tree. He came at the Viking came at him. They clashed with axe and cudgel, fighting until neither man could go any longer. They were tired. They'd fought hard. Eventually, the Viking triumphed, but the Saxons always have a plan and a little trick up their sleeves. They sent a man round under the bridge to sneak up on the Viking and kill him. With him dead, the Saxon army rolled over the Viking lines. Again, in the time-honoured society, the dead shall now rise, take on water, and I'll explain what happens next. So, the Saxon army, able to come over the bridge, simply rolled through the unprotected, unarmoured, unready Vikings. You remember earlier I said Harald Hardrada came over with 300 longships? By the time he left again, beaten for Norway, he only had enough men to fill 37. It was brutal. It was a massacre. Of course, it meant the rightful King of England kept his crown, which is always important, and the usurper, Harald Hardrada, who was actually killed at Stamford Bridge, never got a chance to bring his villainy to English shores. So, that's a win. While all this was going on, the third contender for the crown decided that he wanted to have a go. His name was William the Conqueror, William Duke of Normandy. He had an army of Normans, surprisingly, men famed for their skill with long shields and lances on horseback. He also had an army of Flemish and the Britons from Brittany, which he wanted to bring over in an attempt to claim the English throne. While Harold was fighting at Stamford Bridge, William came over, landed at the Isle of Wight. He burned all the grounds between the Isle of Wight and Hastings, razing the English south coast to the ground. Harold formed his army back up and rushed down to meet them. He ran the entire length from York to Hastings in 3 days and formed his army up at a place called Senlac Ridge, just outside of Hastings. His army formed their shield wall, and attempted to defend themselves. While tired, weary, having just run a huge distance in 3 days, William's fresh army formed up, and he sent his right flank at the Saxons first. His right flank, the Flemish army, charged the Saxon lines first. He followed that up by sending his left flank in, the men from Brittany, who also charged the Saxon line, and then he charged his centre in. He repeatedly pummeled the Saxon line, trying to break it. He fired arrows at it, he charged horse at it, he charged infantry at it, he put everything he had at it. But it wasn't enough. The Saxons were on a hilltop and they had a strong shield wall. Eventually the Flemish pulled back. The men from Brittany pulled back. The left flank disengaged. And eventually William's centre flank themselves also disengaged. About midway through the battle, a rumour started spreading through the Norman lines. Someone mentioned to someone that they thought they'd seen Duke William get killed. Duke William was dead! The Saxons, of course, were very happy. The Normans devastated. If Duke William was dead, what was the point of being here? William's alive! William was alive! He took his helmet off in the middle of the battle with arrows flying everywhere. An incredibly brave gesture. Very uncharacteristic of a Norman, I might add. He took his helmet off and continued to defend the newly redoubled lines that he had. He charged his right in, he charged his left flank in, attempting again and again to hit the Saxon line. The Saxons were tired. They were starting to break, but the Normans just didn't have enough to push through. Even with the knowledge that their Duke was there, they just couldn't do it. Eventually, William's right flank retreated, the Saxons giving chase. But it was all a trick! It was all a lie! The Saxons, having chased, abandoned their shield wall formation, came down off the hill and were killed. The trick was repeated over and over and over. On the left flank, the men turned to retreat. The Saxons turned to give chase, and again were just encountered and overwhelmed. It was savage. Harold Godwinson himself died in the battle. Some say he was struck in the eye with an arrow. Some say he was hacked to pieces by Norman dogs. Could have gone either way, but unfortunately it went towards the Normans, and they ruled England with an iron fist, being cruel, being really...
Victory and history go to the winners. The dead shall rise.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been the Far Isles Medieval Reenactment Society. We hope you've enjoyed our display. We hope you've learned something. If you want to come over, have a little talk, have a look at the weapons we use. We promise they're all real steel, apart from obviously the wooden ones. If you want to come over, have a look, maybe hold one, see how they feel. If you're interested in getting to know us, we're over in the green gazebo over there, just next to the ice cream van. Please do pop over next to the ice cream van and between the ice cream van and the sausage shop. Please do pop over, have a see, have a look, have a chat. We're happy to talk and show you what we've got. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a lovely, lovely afternoon.